to video 2 for this week. So we're still in chapter 13, which is called More Trigonometry. And today we're going to be looking at finding the area of triangles. Up to this point in your life, you will have found area of triangles by doing base times perpendicular height divided by 2. So we've only been able to find the area of triangles if we've got a base and a perpendicular height. Today I shall broaden your horizons and you will be able to find the area of whichever triangle you please, providing we've got the correct sides and angles relative to each other. Now we're going to start this by drawing and labelling a triangle. Now it is absolutely essential that you label your triangle exactly the same as I've labelled my triangle. We are going to be labelling triangles in this way for weeks. And all of the rules and formulae and things that we're going to look at depend on triangles being labelled in the way that I am about to label. Okay, so let's draw ourselves a triangle. It doesn't matter what your triangle looks like, any triangle will do. So we're going to label it. Just like in Pythagoras, we're going to have a little a, b and c, a lowercase a, b and c on the outside of the triangle. So just like in Pythagoras, so we use little a, b and c. Our angles are going to be labelled with capital A, B and C. And it's absolutely essential that your capital A is opposite your lowercase a, your capital B is opposite your lowercase b, and your capital C is opposite your lowercase c. That's really, really important. I need you to memorise that way of labelling a triangle. It didn't matter where my first lot of A, B and C went. Just make sure that once you've labelled your little a, b and c, your big A and your little a are opposite each other. Okay, so that's going to be our default method of labelling a triangle. So the first formula that we're going to look at, next week we're going to look at a couple more rules, but today we're going to be looking at working out the area. So the area of a triangle, and this is the rule that you need to learn for today, equals a half AB sine C. So A and B are the sides, and that is a big C. Okay, so little a and b here, and this is a big C, because you can only ever do a sine, a cos, a tan of an angle. Okay, this is our formula that we're going to be using for today. So half AB sine C. Now, you'll notice that little a and little b make angle C. So that's really important. If I was in the lesson, I'd be prancing around with my arms. A and B make C. Okay, so these sides here, A and B, make angle C. That's really important because your triangle won't be pre-labelled. You will have to label your triangle. So it's really, really important that A and B make C. Let's have a look at what I mean. This is not very difficult. You'll see very, very quickly what I mean. So this is yet another random triangle. Let's pretend that this is 87 degrees, that's 10 metres, and that's 15 metres, and I want the area of that triangle. Up to now in your life, you've had no way of doing that because we haven't got a base and a perpendicular height. So, the first thing we need to do is label our triangle. So, let's think about what we want in the formula. We want an A and a B to make angle C. Well, look, I have two sides making an angle. So I'm going to need those two sides to be called A and B. Okay, right, so that means that's little c. And then we need to label, so that's big A, opposite B, and opposite C. And I want you to always label that triangle. So let's have a go now at working this out. So I get that the area equals, so always write your formula, half AB sine C, and you need to know that. That's something that you need to memorise. So half AB sine C. And then I've got a half times, or what's A? A is 10 times what's B? B is 15 times sine of what's my C? 87. And that's going to give me the area of this triangle. So half AB sine C gives me 74 point, I'll say 74.9. So 74.9, and I was in meters, so meters squared. So that works quite nicely, doesn't it? That's not too tricky. The only room for error is that your two sides have to make the angle. Had I had these two sides and this angle, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Okay, that's when the other rules that we're going to be looking at next week would come into play. So let's have a look at how about if I know the area and I'm missing a side. Let's have a look at that. So I've got let's say I've got this triangle and I know that that's 75 degrees. Oh, you can't see a thing. There we go. Let's say that's 75 degrees. That's 8 meters. That's X, and I know that the area equals 66 meters squared. Okay, and my job is to find out what X is. It doesn't matter that this is slightly different. We still need to label this triangle. Look, I've got two sides of interest making an angle, so they've got to be A and B. And then that means that's little c, that's big C, that's big A, that's big B. And it's really important that that labelling becomes very fluent. If that labelling isn't fluent, you're going to really, really struggle next week with the sine rule and the cosine rule. So let's write down what we've got. We know that the area equals half AB sine C. Right, well, what is the area? The area is 66, so that equals a half times 8 times X times sine of 75. And now it's a case of rearranging to find X. So at the minute, my X is being times by 8, times by a half, and times by 75. So in any order, I need to undo that. Okay? You might be happy with the fact that a half times 8, that means a half of 8, which is 4. So I've got 4 times X times sine 75. If I divide this 66 by 4 and by 75, I'm going to get X. So I'm going to have 66 over 4 times sine 75. My equals haven't lined up, which is a bit of a disaster. 66 over 4 times sine 75. And that's going to give me X. I got it as a third thing, so I've pressed the SD button, which has told me that X equals 17.1 meters. Okay, so I divided by my 4 times 75, which is the same as dividing by 4 and then dividing by 75, which has given me 17.1. Look back at your triangle. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah, I think it does, doesn't it? 17.1 here and an 8 here, giving us 66. That sounds about right, given the numbers we had on the previous one. Okay, right, I'm going to do one more example, then I'll stop waffling at you. So, this time we're not going to know the angle, and I have lost my ruler. There we go. This time we're not going to know the angle. So, in fact, let's go crazy. Let's have a little isosceles triangle. So, that's got little markers like that. So he's isosceles. And I know that this is 8 meters, and I know that the area equals, oh, what do we reckon that area is? What's sensible for that area, do you think? About 30 meters squared? Well, let's see what this gives us. So we want this angle here. I'm going to use a theta for the angle. Okay? That's a theta, a Greek letter. So it's like a circle, but then you keep going and you cross through it. That's called a theta. And it's a Greek letter that's used a lot for angles. Right, what am I doing? I need to find out what theta is. Well, here we go again. Let's label our triangle. So I know that this is, in fact, before I swap to pink, I might write a little 8 on there. I know that that's 8. And then I've got, well, A and B are making that angle. So that must be little c. So that's big C, that's big A, that's big B. And then we write down what we've got. So we know that the area equals a half AB sine C. So I know that the area, which is 30, equals a half times 8 times 8 times sine of C. So 30 equals, well, a half times 8 times 8, that's 32, maybe? 32 sine C. So divide by 32. That isn't my answer. Oh, I should be putting a theta in here. My apologies. Sine of my angle. My angle is theta. Sorry about that. Right, I haven't finished. I don't want to know what sine theta is. I want to know what theta is. So in order to do that, remember this is where I press shift sign and you get the inverse sine of 30 over 32. So that's what your calculator should look like, which gives me 69.6. So I get 69.6 degrees equals theta. Okay, so that angle there would be 69.6. They are the style of questions that are on this week's sheet. As always, if you're stuck, please shout. But yeah, as long as you remember this, and as long as you label your triangle like this, you can't go wrong. Famous last words.